Russell T here, Russell T Davies. Russell T Davies, 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 Russell T Davies.
Years and years and years, yeah. It's Rusty's brand new show. Is it keto? Clear away those fears, yeah. It's Rusty Davies, count the miles down the road. Years and years and years, yeah. Let's watch a brand new show. His chimney blows. Clear away those fears, yeah. Let's watch a new show, cause Doctor Who sucks.
Who cares about Years and Years? Episode 6, the finale, 2029 to 2034. Okay, we've had our grand finale of Years and Years now, and I'm sure it generated a lot of hot takes from many corners. So let's survey this room and check out its four corners and ask you guys, what did you think of the finale?
It was okay. I was not overjoyed with it. I was not heart-rendingly disappointed with it. I thought it was just okay.
I thought it was messy, but I think it was, kind of that typical r.t.d. series finale level of messy, where and to preempt, I've not seen any of his other series. I've only seen Doctor Who and I've only seen Years and Years, so I'm not sure. I'm only going off the patterns I know from Years and Years, or from Doctor Who. But from watching this, it kind of reminded me a little bit of how he kind of gets loose with logic, because he wants a certain end point to happen, and and that end point, is realized or whatever, and there's a certain theme and a message he's really trying to get out. And, at that point, like I said, it kind of gets a little messy, a little loose with logic as he gets to that point. However, this in particular, because I vibed, me personally, I kind of liked the message and the theme he was going for. I was more willing to excuse how kind of messy the writing got in the end, as opposed to some of his Doctor Who finales.
It was certainly not the finale I was hoping for from the show. I did not hate it. I was compelled all the way through. Particularly at some points I was so engrossed on my rewatch I could scarcely make notes and stuff. But nonetheless, there were ways in which the message and the themes of it resonated with me. There were ways in which it didn't. There were elements of it which were... It was decidedly in a different register from all the previous episodes. And it did give me very much this sense of needing to be an uplifting sort of... it was in some ways a Doctor Who finale, almost. The way everything plays out, the way everything wraps up. And I hate to use this word, but it did give me ever so slight hope punk vibes. So the ultimate sort of uplifting nature of it, it was so counter to everything I was expecting from episode 1 onwards. I totally thought we were going for the doom-laden, bittersweet, melancholy, dystopian future, world gets nuked. I totally thought we were going for that kind of ending. And the fact that we scarcely even touch on that really surprised me. And, I would be lying if I said it didn't disappoint me a bit, but I would say it was certainly it was compelling, it was gripping, it was fairly interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't long into the episode where I remembered, of course, this is a Russell T Davies finale. And it's not just Doctor Who, like you were saying, Deadlocked. It's not uncommon with his shows to have endings that are kind of adrift from the rest of the shows. They might be a bit anticlimactic, like Cucumbers was. They might be, maybe incoherent's too harsh. They might be incomprehensible, like some of Doctor Who's or parts of this. But yeah, I think he does have an issue with endings, and it's not that they're not planned out or anything. The problem might be that they're very planned out. Like, he has these endpoints in mind. The ending of Years and Years, he said he's had in his mind for 25 years. Presumably the Edith turning into a water ghost thing. And I think that explains to a degree why it feels kind of disconnected from everything else the show was doing, when it's suddenly the thing he thought of a long time ago into a show that's so much about the now and the close future.
Yeah, well, I thought it was interesting because, Gig, you mentioned how, this ending, this type of ending, was contrary to what you thought would happen going through, the series. And I'm actually on the other side of that, where I was kind of thinking we would get this ending, and I kind of was hoping for it, to be honest, because again, I think that's what he's trying to say. And the reason why I say that is because it mainly comes back to two moments that are really big for me, and they've been kind of discussed on the podcast before. But it's when he has, I believe it's the lines are talking about how the time they're living in seems so extraordinary compared to the past, and how back then everything was kind of nice, and they were in the pause where everything was nice and kind of perfect and peachy, and no one cared about politics and everything. And they made a point to have that conversation twice. And when I heard that, it felt like Russell T Davies was trying to show that that's what people say, but he's trying to say like that's not true. For the same reasons it was kind of criticized, or that kind of idea is criticized on the podcast before, this kind of, I don't know how to call it, but like temporal exceptionalism, like thinking like the time you're living in right now is like the end point. Like this is things are not going to get any, or things are just going to get worse from here. They've never been this bad. Everything else was fine. We were able to work that out. But this time we're living in, this is doomsday. And the fact that they had those conversations, and r.t.d. kind of, was kind of pushing us, I felt like pushing us towards looking at that sentiment critically. And it's kind of what Neo said about how a lot of people think like they were born in the wrong generation or whatever. They kind of glorify what happened in the past. I really think like r.t.d. was going for a, things seem crazy, but they've kind of always been crazy. The world's always been mad. And this is not any kind of exception to that. I was expecting this ending. I wasn't surprised by it. I was kind of surprised by how little messy it was, but I thought it was going to end in this kind of positive, happy upswing. And I didn't expect any kind of nuclear holocaust or anything like that.
Now that's well said. I like your terminology of, was it temporal exceptionalism?
I don't know what I just said. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think that's what, I don't even know if that makes sense, but...
No, that makes sense. That's really good. I think I know what you mean. It's partly what irritated me with the finale. I feel like the first 4 episodes of the series are they link together very well, and they tell a very connected story that makes sense for the characters, especially with Danny, who kind of serves as the main character. And when he dies, it's like the point of the show was to kind of disavow that temporal exceptionalism stuff and show how gradually life and societies can degrade and get much worse and get as bad as those news stories you hear about and you turn off because they're too far away and you can't emotionally invest in them, like of refugees drowning and that. And then episode 5 felt a little different because it's so much more about reaction to Danny's death and all the stuff going on with Victor and Steven becoming evil and everything. And then in this one, it's like if the first 4 and kind of 5 episodes were about specifically showing how society gets worse and how, I think r.t.d. even in the writer's tally said it's like fascism turning up on a regular British family's doorstep, the finale skips so many steps. Like at the ending montage.
And BBC is back.
Yeah, like everything's happy now, and it's like things were set up realistic and grounded before to how things can get worse. And then everything just got better.
Yeah.
I know in Muriel's speech, r.t.d. is kind of setting out how he thinks things can get better, but I wasn't really buying the way he was saying they can improve. And then it was so frenetic and rushed how things improved.
I think the second half of this episode was honestly, for me, like devoid of content. I mean, I know Gig said that he found it gripping and engaging, but the most shocking thing for me about watching this was that it actually dragged. And like that got worse for me on the second time because so much of this episode is spent just watching people do stuff, and it's like hinging on tension and like, oh, will they get Victor out? Will Edith survive? And people aren't saying anything. And what I loved so much about like the earlier episodes is just the these small, minute character interactions which like reveal things about their personal lives. But here we're just watching stuff happen. And I think the cracks started to show in episode 5 with that big, long, boring Edith heist scene, which sort of like got better at the end when she started talking to Bethany. But it's just very like lacking, and all the stuff about not blaming the tides of history and taking personal accountability. I thought that was really great, but in the second half of this episode, there's nothing more Russell has to say about that really. It just sort of curtails off.
Well, the explosion, the first episode had an explosion, then the last episode had an explosion. It's all this classic, very thought out r.t.d. symmetry. Just like at the start of the finale, we hear Ruby talking about how they're injecting life into previously inert molecules to create new foodstuffs, and then at the end that's kind of what Edith does. becoming like a new life form made out of water. So these little connections that were totally intended, they're all crawling around.
A bit of asymmetry, which I thought was interesting, was that you have episode 1 and Edith is practically not in it. And by the end of this, she's our main character, sort of. I mean, her journey is what the whole finale hinges on.
She's the doctor in this episode.
She even regenerates, like... It's interesting that you call Edith the main character of the episode, because as much as I do get that, and certainly she defines the ending, sort of that big final minisode, I also felt that a big emotional spine of the finale was Stephen and Celeste. I think certainly that sort of subplot there, culminating in that massive confrontation they have in the second half of the episode, which is sort of, I'd say, one of the more intense scenes in the whole series.
That was my least favourite scene in the entire series, actually.
Oh, wow, really? Really? Why?
I thought that was a genuinely bad scene. Because if you watch it again, nothing happens. They don't talk. Especially Celeste doesn't talk. It goes, Stephen, put down the gun. No. Put it down. No. Put it down. No. And then a guy walks in. It's just so hollow. And like, if you take Murray's music out of that scene, there's no content.
It's funny you say that because I kind of hated the music. I would have preferred it in total silence.
Stephen's behaviour throughout the scene as well was totally unconvincing. I mean, he's in absolute hysterics to the point where he can't even tell that he's like scaring Celeste to death. You know, she's frightened for her life. And then Woody comes in, and after he gets shot, Stephen's all kind of slightly cavalier about it. He's like, oh, that worked. And it's a bit of like a cool moment, and it's just felt really off. I don't know what, like, just not a good scene, honestly.
It felt dramatically inert to me in that same way. Like, if you look at the dialogue, like, there's not much happening dramatically in there, especially because, maybe I just read this too accurately, but this felt like a real I'm lucky I have this letter moment, in that I already knew the gun was for him, not for her.
Yeah, absolutely. And you learn nothing about the characters. Stephen, when he doesn't realize that he's making Celeste, fear for her life, it feels like Russell is making him not realize that, rather than him organically not realizing that, because it's supposed to be a reveal, like, oh, this gun is for me. But as soon as he takes it out, it's like, obviously, he wants to die himself. So it's just completely, there's no, weight to any of those reveals. And I feel like Russell was doing a lot of misdirections in this episode, and that one was one which definitely didn't work. But one that I absolutely loved was when Muriel is saying, oh, we divide the money amongst the 4 of you. And it didn't click for me that she was talking about Celeste. So when she, goes down and kisses Celeste on the forehead, that was one of the most...
That was lovely.
Amazing.
Because Celeste is the MVP of the series, I think.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Most people have sort of come around to that train by now, which is good. Yeah.
Something unrelated to all that, but I thought was enjoyable, was when the BBC closed in the first time-skipping montage, the little ticker reel down the bottom was Netflix buys classic titles, ITV stock soar, Lib Dems overjoyed.
I think there were bits in the ticker about basically all the parties being happy about the BBC shutting down. I think there was a bit of I think there was some self-congratulatoriness going on with that BBC stuff. Like, this idea of like, oh, the BBC, all the political parties hate it, but it tells the truth, and it's so great that it's finally back. Welcome back, guys. I think there was just a bit of this, maybe a slight of media group think, and just like r.t.d being all love-a-dove with the BBC. I don't know, it was funny.
On the ticker, it said Netflix buying classic series. So, if you were to extrapolate that, one of those classic series could be, I don't know, Doctor Who. Possibly.
I was thinking Blake 7, but okay.
I don't know.
Actually, was that even BBC? I don't know.
I don't know what you just said. My name's not Blake. But it felt like it could possibly be a scathing indictment of the Chibnall era, trying to be so Netflix-like that r.t.d says, well, actually, it's just going to become Netflix, Chibs. So there you go. Could it be?
Speaking of things closing, what did you think of the detail that the food banks all closed and people didn't donate anything anymore, and that was the end of, what do you call people donating? There's a word for it.
Charity?
Yeah, charity.
I think that was part of a wider sense of apocalypticness in the episode, including the monkey flu, which sort of petered out over the rest of the episode. Like, it starts off as like, oh my god, it's the end, there's no more food, everyone's going to get sick, and then that starts to become less and less important.
It starts out bananas, but it ends a bit of a lemon, I suppose.
Holy shit. Well, I thought it was interesting. I don't want to be that guy, but we're kind of getting into this groove of saying this felt kind of rushed and messy compared to what was built up to in episodes 1 through 4. So I don't want to get all Game of Thronesy. But
I mean, this is the Negative Path reunion, so please go ahead.
All right, I'm just going to dive right in. Do you think this needed another episode or 2 to kind of go into that trend, or just needed tighter writing?
I think maybe less or more. I think 1 to 4, just with a few little rejigs, would have worked completely well as their own thing. But 5 and 6, they kind of opened up a lot. So yeah, I think you have to shrink it or grow it. But yeah, this was a kind of awkward size, the 6.
I think all this needs to work at a serviceable level for me was more dialogue scenes in the second half with characters actually saying things with substance, and then I would have been happy, as opposed to lots of long, sort of drawn out scenes of watching and reacting to things, and Marigold, whose music I like, but it's sort of carrying the episode almost. But I don't know, maybe another episode would have worked. It's just such a, messy is the word for sure.
It's interesting. I wanted to bring it back because you're talking about how kind of some scenes just kind of felt wasted, and going back to that Steven scene, with him and Celeste, and how it kind of just felt wasted. And I kind of feel like what you mean about, it doesn't necessarily need more episodes, more time. It just needed tighter writing. And so that scene could have been something very, very, powerful, because obviously now we're in the position that Steven is going to be redeemed after what we saw, what he did in episode 5, where he's, being in charge of these death camps and putting to death, someone who's a member of the family, really, who he blames for his brother's murder, and he's smiling about it, like he's the villain. And then now, at the end of the series, he's kind of redeemed. So that scene could have been really meaningful, kind of showing how he's moved towards redemption, or how he feels kind of remorse. But like you said, it's just kind of contentless. There's no real talking going on, so it's wasted.
And you have to wonder, is this Russell's idea of love, which is so critical to the end of the episode?
Mm-hmm.
You just forgive him because it's a little bit, idiot's lantern, dare I say, at the end. That sort of unconditional forgiveness palaver, which, I'm not about that. It was weird.
There's 3 things about Steven being forgiven that really annoy me. The first is that it's like he didn't just punch Victor or swear at Victor. He sent him to a concentration camp he'd learned earlier in episode 5, kill people through, pestilence. He absolutely knew what he was doing. And yeah, like Deadlocked says, he was smiling about it. This isn't a forgivable thing, sending someone to a terrible death, sending a family member to any death. The second thing is he didn't even get a scene with Victor. This is so, like I was saying, dramatically inert. It's just ridiculous to have 2 characters that are obviously meant to interact and not give them any material together at all. Did we really need the endless scenes of planning the heist and that, instead of just a 1-minute dialogue scene between Victor and Steven at the end? Even if I still was uncomfortable with him being forgiven, I would have liked to seen it developed a little bit at least.
And we get no insight into his sense of shame or remorse after the scene of him shooting Woody in the foot, or dare I say shooting Tim Shaw in the foot.
What annoys me the most is connected to the stuff about his workplace, and that's the whole thing. It seems to be that the idea he could be forgiven is kind of predicated off the fact he was going to whistleblow about the job. He wasn't completely morally gone. Celeste was still on his side to a degree, or at least thinking he should be saved because he was gonna...
That was only because his hand was forced.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He kept saying he had this idea, I was gonna give the file over to the police and kill myself, and all this stuff. But then he only does that when the gig, the jig is up. Everything is on the TV, and he pretty much has to do it now because, everything's falling apart. So I thought that was weird.
Yeah, how much longer would he have waited otherwise? That's a good question.
I don't think it would have done it. The series had marked him multiple times as a coward, explicitly in dialogue. I think it was just a salve, a way to make himself feel more righteous and moral and okay with what he's doing. The idea that someday, one tomorrow, he'd whistleblow, I don't think he ever would have done it.
In episode 1, he has a little speech about how, anyone could start their own political party, but, he doesn't. So he's been framed since the very beginning as the guy who doesn't do stuff. Also, just if there's no scenes with Steven after he shoots Woody, it begs the question, why did he survive? The character has a perfectly natural way to be written out of the series where he shoots himself, except they keep him around to not have a presence in the rest of the episode. It's really strange.
I think there are numerous ways in which what r.t.d wanted for this finale, which is A, on one hand, the happy ending where the bad guys get taken down, and B, the ending minisode where the family all unite for Edith's ascension or whatever happens there. I think those two things are kind of a bit of a stranglehold. Like, they force certain decisions. Like, they force the episode to be plotty and sort of action-led in a way that's not as interesting as the dialogue-led scenes. And they lead to stuff like I don't know, maybe too happy, too nice ending for Steven and such.
Yeah, and it's like the scene where they're all gathered at the end, maybe they don't speak to each other in that scene because, like, what would they say? Like, Steven, that was weird when you sent Victor to a death camp. How are you going?
It should be absolutely on Victor's shoulders whether he wants to forgive Steven or not. You know what I mean? And so, like Neo said, like, we don't get a scene where he, you know, forgives them or talks to him or whatever. We just kind of move past it and we say, well, Edith forgives him, you know, so that's fine, you know. But, like, to not have Victor, the victim of this, get a say or whatever, or not get to see his say is fucked up a little bit.
I think Victor's really been fucked over by the last two episodes. As much as r.t.d went on to the press about how, well, it's not a bury your gays moment because the drama doesn't straighten around them, it's still very much important. Like, Victor just got completely shafted in the last two episodes. He gets one scene early on in the set where he's like, when he talks to his mate in the concentration camp, and he gets a bit of characterization there. That's it. And that's kind of disappointing.
Well, it's, you know, very pertinent that you should say that because there is literally a line about, Victor, you're not that important. No, I did kind of like that. It's just a shame that, like, the episode itself agrees, but I did like the sentiment of, like, no, all these refugees are important, and, you know, yeah.
Sorry, Yaz, I forgot you were there.
Going back to r.t.d quotes about the series, regarding the finale, he was saying to the Radio Times he thought if there was controversy over the ending, it would mostly be over Edith's big speech about love and all that. He said, I can absolutely guarantee you there'll be people rapidly taking the piss out of that. It takes a lot of nerve and a deep breath to say, I believe in this speech and I'm going to transmit this on BBC One, that I believe the human race has its potential, the fact we can love and be loved. And then he goes about how men feel embarrassed about love, blah, blah, blah. But I think, like, that really wasn't the issue for me. Like, I don't mind the power of love stuff. It's more everything else in the episode and, like, the structure of it that I think's the problem, rather than just, like, the sentimentality of it exactly.
Well, for me, it's also his failure to define love. I mean, the speech literally goes like, I'm not data, I'm not information, I am my family. Then she lists family members and she says, I'm love. And that's it. There's no elaboration. I would like an elab, please.
Well, he did say he wrote the speech in 30 seconds. In his interview, so that might have some.
Oh, it shows.
Oh, it shows, Rusty.
I kind of liked the speech, personally. I realise it's not very deep, but I think, it's maybe a mixture of how well it was performed as well. But the point where she brings up, you know, her dead mum and her dead brother, and she specifically frames that in terms of the memories, which we now know we've been the whole show, we've been watching these scientist guys kind of review her memories and stuff. And I think there was something, it was maybe a bit of a miasma, but I think the treatment of it as essentially her memories of her family and that life, those experiences she's had with them, the idea that those both make up who she is and both embody love and existence in a sense. I thought linking that to this idea of her becoming data and becoming this cyber ghost or whatever, that kind of took me by surprise a little bit, and I did like it. I did like the feeling of it, the mood of it. It felt elegiac, I think is the word. And I think very much that whole final minisode was r.t.d just trying to grapple with death and the idea of something beyond death, which is why I wasn't particularly fussed with the ambiguity of whether or not it worked, which I know Neo verged about a lot.
Yeah, ambiguous endings, I think. Some I really like. I like them when the ambiguity is central to the ending itself, like the ending of the revised endings of Blade Runner you know, the point of whether Deckard is a replicant or not is so important because it's about the humanity of people versus the humanity of androids, and what does it matter? So not knowing if he's a robot or not plays into the whole story of the movie. Or the ending of Inception where, what's his name? Cobb not caring about whether he's in a dream or not anymore shows his emotional arc. But when it's just an ending that's ambiguous so you don't know what happened next, I find them tiresome and kind of pretentious. And here, like, we don't see what happens next. We don't see if Edith just died or she became a data ghost or something fucked up or whatever in the process. And r.t.d's had a big deal in the press of saying, I will never answer what happened to Edith. That's a big reason there'll never be a series 2. But, like, the whole finale is very optimistic and, like, a bit hope punk. And if there was going to be any cynicism injected into it, it was the super sci-fi, high concept, consciousness transference stuff really the place to inject the cynicism instead of the grounded, relatable issues like climate change or countries descending into fascism with concentration camps and authoritarian leaders or class warfare or the police or anything like that. Like, was the Water Ghost really the place to introduce ambiguity?
Would you say that all this stuff about stories and memories and the relationship between those things and our life experiences is maybe the kind of thing a certain other writer is better suited towards crafting scripts around?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a certain Scottish gentleman. There's a line where she says, like, oh, it's not imagination. It's just hasn't happened yet. Like, that's Moffat. It is. Pretty sure that's literally in a Moffat episode.
Speaking of which, did you like that corridor fantasy she was having with Viv?
I love the filming of it. It looked so good.
Yeah, that was great.
The look of it was good, but I mean, yeah, it was like a cool image, but it just hammered home how this episode didn't have any good Viv scenes. So, like, what the fuck?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, her scene at the start with the journalist was kind of shit, I thought. Like, she was just trotting out Trump cliches at the journalist.
Trump, yeah.
Yeah, just like, lol, he says fake news, she says fake news, haha. It's pretty clever. I mean, because her selling the death camps in episode 5 I thought was amazing. And
yeah.
This is nothing. Just nothing.
Yeah, the whole idea of chasing her as her ghost in the machine, it speaks to a bigger problem I had in the episode, in that it was really melodramatic. The lines and how Jessica Hines was delivering them. She's a great actress, but there's no denying it was very melodramatic. And so much of the episode's dialogue was so overwrought and theatrical, and it really felt disconnected to even episode 5 or the past episodes to me. A lot of the stuff Gran was saying as well, just like the phrasing of beware the clowns and trickster men and all that kind of stuff. It was
that was terrible.
really bizarre, the dialogue. There was no naturalism to it anymore. The other episode, r.t.d's so good at very naturally writing characters speaking like real people. And then in the end, it's not even that they're speaking poetic or anything, it's just they're speaking very to the themes and very melodramatically, and it grated quite a bit for me.
Beware those men, the jokers and the tricksters and the clowns. They will laugh us into hell.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've been going on about how I would have liked more dialogue, but with this stuff at the end about Edith living on through her memories, I kind of would have actually liked less dialogue, because, like, it's an ambiguous situation. It could have used yet less, you know, just words and words about love. And
she had that whole speech about becoming an imp, a sprite. And
yes,
it was very flowery. It was just written it was almost like a Shakespearean register. It was a bit strange.
Yeah, real people don't talk like that. I agree with Neo.
I think r.t.d is maybe more of a spiritual writer than he's often considered. It reminds me of that quote from David Lynch about Eraserhead being his most spiritual film, and how everyone's confused by that. But I think this episode, it was written in so much of that register you occasionally got on Who, and even that one bit you hate in Cucumber, Neo, with the ghost turning up. And just like when r.t.d starts kind of switches into a poetic mode, and everything gets kind of flowery and quite, you know, transcendent and soulful, and it was quite jarring in a series that had done virtually none of that, with the possible exception of that bit in episode 1 where Fran was telling the story of the crack, which was also kind of went nowhere.
It's funny, when you said flowery, it just reminded me how, you know, flowers need water to survive, and how Edith becomes water at the end. That could also be a bit of symmetry with how her dad became water when she drank him.
Oh yeah, that's
and got flushed. I mean, I'm talking about Muriel's speech. I thought that speech politically had some decent ramifications, because I thought the bit of that speech I really liked was when she specifically called out the element of the whole £1 t-shirt bit, and the bit where she called out the system whereby people are not kind of given the value that their labour creates. I was really surprised actually that he got that specific with kind of going after not so much capitalism but people's apathy towards it and willingness to participate in it. Because yeah, on one hand it could have just been a very bland, take personal responsibility, stop criticising the system, blah blah blah, but it wasn't that. Like, we actually got an attack on this idea of like a mode of production that's fundamentally unequal, a system that fundamentally, kicks people out of their jobs and dehumanizes and atomizes us. There was that specific bit about how we're all just fine with, the complete automation of these places because we don't have to face up to the people being, paid less than they deserve. And I really liked that. And I thought as a dramatic device as well, you can see how the speech kind of galvanizes the different family members to take action. So, Rosie, obviously that's flagged up very specifically. She calls Gran to thank her. And we obviously see its effect on Bethany as well. So I thought I liked that, and I thought there is something just quite ballsy about having a huge bit of your final episode be devoted to a character making a big portentous speech about stuff.
Yeah, the episode as a whole is way more didactic than I thought it was going to be. It's basically a call to arms. It was kind of, which I kind of almost respect that in a way. But I did like the way the speech was written. It felt very years and years to me, which is a compliment. And the rest of the finale didn't feel enough like years and years to me. But it had something that bugged me about it, which I'm not sure if it's nuance or a flaw, which is that Muriel as a person, as a character, seems too smart to have voted for Viv Rook back in whatever episode she did that. Because she clearly is a very thoughtful person, and she thinks about, how her actions have consequences and, how she plays into the system. And I get that she probably saw Viv as someone who would dismantle the system, but remember how Viv started out by saying she doesn't give a fuck about Israel and Palestine. Muriel seems like the kind of person who would give a fuck about Israel and Palestine. But I'm not sure if it's highlighting a deliberate contradiction internal to Muriel, or if it's just kind of confused, r.t.d. is writing Muriel sometimes as a slightly misguided older person, or as this wise voice of wisdom, and it's sort of in the middle. But like I said, I haven't decided if that's a problem yet, but I think it's interesting nonetheless.
I think Muriel has been contradictory at times. She's been she kind of seems to go between being really bitchy to Celeste and being really lovely to Celeste, if you notice.
Yeah, and if she this speech paints her as a really compassionate person, but she didn't think about Celeste's feelings at all back in one episode ago. So it is kind of strange. I'm not sure if I'm okay with it. I
really quite dislike the speech. If I may get on a little 60-second soapbox about why it didn't work for me. So if you zoom out of the speech itself a bit and you look at the scope of the larger series, and the interviews, r.t.d.'s been describing the big theme of the series as, is this you? The question, and he specifically calls out Twitter cancellations. He's saying whether the evils of others that we're supposedly so quick to cancel or condemn people over aren't hypocritical or something we're complicit in or in league with. And he's described how Viv's an extension of ourselves. How crude she is apparently what we're deep down or want to be. And while her methods and way of speaking are shocking, a lot of what she does or says is fundamentally understandable. And he's outright said, like we said in an earlier podcast, stuff like the Blink technology banning for kids and that kind of thing is fundamentally actually a good thing. And then in Muriel's big speech, all the problems of, the generation are placed at the generation's feet. The things like automation and the job loss that results from that, she says. The cause is consumers shopping, at the supermarkets with automated cashiers. I get that it's speaking to a larger kind of structural thing, but I just find that example so ridiculous. And a lot of the theme kind of ridiculous because more humane businesses always tend to cost more money, in this kind of system we're in. It's certainly something like a supermarket. If a struggling single mother like Rosie was for much of the series, is she meant to go to some more expensive supermarket with real cashiers and spend more money and get less food for her kids out of some principle that that's the way you sustain a supposedly society that'll be healthy otherwise? I find it very ridiculous and very celebrity actor riding a private jet to go lecture people about global warming and how they should reduce their carbon footprint kind of thing.
It was a little privileged.
Yeah, it's placing blame on the individual in a way I find really maybe easy for r.t.d to write, but I think that won't ring true to a lot of viewers in very different situations than him. And in Muriel, who, comes from money, at least in the sense of having the big house.
I think there's a problem that r.t.d tries to kind of get around. I think that he can't, which is that he wants to galvanize people to action. In Muriel's speech, she says things like, did you walk out? Did you write letters of complaint? Like he wants to preach to people for not doing stuff, but the stuff that he suggests they do is not actually enough. Like the range, he doesn't like there isn't a big enough range of political kind of action or activism kind of gestured at almost. I mean, maybe there is in some ways. I mean, we see people blowing up a concentration camp and stuff, but at the same time, is within all of that, we get the whole, Rosie drove the van through a fence and stuff, and we get it's all very acceptable. And this kind of leads me to something maybe a bit crucial, which is a difference between this and Children of Earth, for example, which is that when it comes to the people sort of taking action and fighting back against all these horrible things, in Children of Earth, it turns into a brawl, kind of. We get violence, we get people fighting. In this, in Years and Years, it's kind of bloodless. Like it's kind of well, just get your phones out. Yeah, if we stream it to the world, everything will be fine. It's like it's sort of it's kind of the range of imagination and the range of how far he's willing to take it is maybe not sufficient for this kind of story. I don't know.
I like the idea of galvanizing people to enact direct change, and like you say, I love Rosie breaking down the zoning fence and all that kind of thing. But the idea that it's just a problem of people being complacent and apathetic, it's so wrong-footed. Like we see with Viv in the earlier episodes, how the media is a huge arm of how power is sustained with, her constant onslaught news channel and her suppression of journalists, like in this episode. And we see in this show, like David was saying in the 4th podcast, how global and interconnected issues are, how systemic they are across, countries and regions and everything. And even if a lot of British citizens topple their government by telling on it to the police or whatever, that doesn't magically fix the rest of Europe's issues, let alone climate change. And I don't think r.t.d is doing some Trotsky thing of saying the whole world should be energized to, do an international permanent world revolution. Like the finale drops so much of the fascism engagement stuff and reduces it so much in that we have people, whistleblowing to the police or essentially filming refugees standing at a fence. We already have all these videos and there's still concentration camps in multiple countries. So I don't understand why he thinks this would actually fix anything. Like calls to action are good, but like you're saying, the actual methods and reasons he's doing surrounding them just feel kind of childish and reductive to me here.
I thought that too, like the videos, I wasn't convinced that they would be enough to, galvanize anyone. And it sort of speaks to how sort of underplayed the fascism element was. And I think that's exemplified by the fact as well that we don't really see what the world is like after Viv is taken down. I mean, we know the BBC's back, thank God, but other than that, it's very...
We know there's another Viv, that bow tie guy.
Oh, yeah.
Everything's the same.
Yeah.
Edith either said the whole thing was collapsing and we just gave it a push, but how is it collapsing? Like, r.t.d sets all up the realistic ways things are bad, and then he says, they were all starting to collapse at the end anyway. But how?
He makes that huge point in the final scene about how the family were just a little part of it. You see, they were part of just a larger movement, but at the same time, that kind of assumes that everyone would rise up against them at once. Like, this all just conveniently happened, or the people fought back, and it's like, would that happen? Is that realistic? I don't know. And certainly when it comes to fascism being underplayed, like you said, Tomtit, there's no engagement with the actual social dimension of fascism. And the fact that fascism relies on having an actual support base, people in the population who support and are complicit in what's happening, like a significant, sizable bit of it. That movement of people in the middle of society against those at the bottom. Right, I mean, as the most we get of that in the show is people voting for Viv. We don't really get who are the Viv cultists in this? Who are the people who wear the Viv hats and have the conspiracy theories about how Viv is actually saving the world from the adrenochrome devouring paedophile reptilians and stuff? Like, where's that?
In r.t.d's conception of why people like Viv, this is a direct quote from him. He says about people like Viv, that's us. We wonder where Donald Trump came from, and then we go online and talk like that, and we wonder where all this anger comes from. So I think in his mind, we're all a bit of Viv, so it's not unbelievable at all. She would have a lot of people outright supporting her. I don't know what I think of that thought he has there, that deep down we're all Donald Trump, and he comes about because we talk like him online. Like, that's odd.
Don't you think it would have been like potentially relevant to include a scene of Muriel and Rosie, expressing regret for having voted for Viv? Like, it's easy to forget that they did, and it shouldn't be easy to forget what they did, because it's like pretty serious, really.
Speaking of scenes that we could have had, this is kind of changing tack a bit, but one detail I did like, and I was a bit annoyed that it was just a detail, was Bethany and the other kind of techno-augmented girls in her workplace. They essentially unionize. Like, we see them all kind of working together to basically just, completely subvert their bosses and kind of their owners, so to speak. But that's throwaway. That's incredibly hand-waved. And, like, I wonder if is there a deleted scene somewhere of Bethany kind of overcoming her fears and kind of convincing the others to join her or something like that?
I could really buy that happened too. Like, Bethany and presumably her friends and associates are so adept with the technology. I can totally see them being able to subvert their bosses, who I presume are much more, business types. I can really... I like the idea of them declaring independence a lot, but I wish we'd gotten more detail, because I think that could be quite realistic, and it would have been really interesting to see more of it.
Do we think that Bethany is overpowered? And if so, do we think it's a problem?
Yes, I do think that. Because, like, I know, I mean, like you're saying, like, it's cool that happened, but that's the Bethany kind of plotline that started with episode 5, how she kind of got these powers and she's now like a techno wizard. Like, that is the largest loosening of logic for me. It's like, I don't understand, like, so basically the government has given her these abilities to control all technology, like across the entire fucking like island, right? Like, she can control all of Britain. And her and those people in that room can do so. And, we keep hearing all this stuff like, no, the government owns me now. So it's not like I'm free or whatever, but we never see any consequence of the government owning her, right? So she helps Edith out with completely illegal activity with her powers in episode 5, and nothing really happens to her, So again, it just seems baffling that a government, and not even like that Vivian Rook's government, you know what I mean? That Vivian Rook's government would allow this to happen, would give these kind of basically, technological wizard power to individuals and really not reinforce it in any meaningful way, so they can just kind of topple the fucking government with what they're doing. Yeah, it's just a complete loosening of logic there.
It's funny because Stephen gets 3 years for having the gun and Bethany gets nothing for taking down the government. Illegal hacking and mass privacy invasions and all the other stuff she was doing with the technology. But that's all fine, apparently. I mean, I support it, but I'm just surprised there was no pushback at all. And
so little... I mean, okay, I don't have a problem with the fact that Bethany is really overpowered, because it's kind of just one of those things. Like, if you need a plot convenience, might as well put it in. The problem is that, like, so little time is devoted to how Bethany feels about her augmentations, and, like, all she really gets is a scene where she's sad that Edith didn't care about her until she turned 18. But the thing is, like, neither did the show. Like, Bethany didn't have any real active role in the plot until she got the, tech stuff. So it's, she was underserved, I felt.
In light of what we were saying about her transhuman stuff in the first few episodes, it's quite ironic how it's turned out, isn't it? Like, it's just not been nearly as relevant as we all thought.
Bethany did do a proper transformation of herself, because if you remember, in her first 2 scenes in the first episode, she's played by a completely different actress.
Uh-huh.
So she did manage to completely transform herself just much earlier than we thought.
I do think there is a pattern of, like, things which seem really important turn out to be purely, like, plot contrivances. Like, the blink, that seemed like a really big deal at the end of whatever episode that was, and here it's just a tower. It's just like a video game obstacle.
It's a Ubisoft tower.
Yeah, it's a Ubisoft tower.
If we're still talking about women in the Lyons family, we got our 5th performer for Lincoln at the end of the episode. What did you think of how that turned out in the end? Is it a minefield?
Tumbleweed.
I'll speak then. The understated way Lincoln was revealed, I liked. But at the same time, I feel like r.t.d doesn't deserve huge congratulations for anything like that. Like, There's a kind of neatness to how the trans stuff was very in the background and never focused on. And I like, in a way, the story was told that way, but certainly it's never a focal point to, Lord congratulations on or anything like that, I think.
It was a bit glib.
One thing, the only thing that really annoys me is most of the other recastings look pretty similar, but I swear only the third and fourth Lincoln looked particularly similar. I can forgive the baby looking different, but apart from that, yeah, not a huge issue. Whereas, like, Lee was such a close resemblance, the last two actors for Lee. Didn't Lee look different at the end?
It annoyed me a bit that Lee had to be gentrified in order to be accepted as part of the family. I always enjoyed watching the character because he didn't change according to his surroundings, but when he was able to, he did show that he loved and enjoyed their company. But looking back, it's been completely clear to me that he was always presented as this ruffian, working-class, dadless kid who would end up in criminal activity no matter what. Right from the very first episode with On the Chinese to the fact that Rosie had called the police on him in episode 4. And now that he's wearing shirts and combing his hair and smiling, he's presented as having grown and matured into this polite middle-class young man, and only now should we feel comfortable accepting him as part of this horrifyingly liberal family.
I think the whole Lincoln thing, I think it was kind of glib. It was like, okay, well, I'm not going to bother writing an actual main transgender character in the show. We're not going to actually like go into her, struggles or anything like that. It's just going to be in the background and stuff. And I've done that. I've ticked off the trans representation box. Brilliant, give me ass pats, But nonetheless, it was at the same time. Sure, r.t.d might not have been able to do that particularly well. It might have turned out, a shit show. But yeah, at the same time, I'm not. Yeah, you're right. Basically, I agree. I'm not inclined to give him superb, sort of congratulations for that.
It's a nice representation that it was just so natural and it was never a drama, and I think that's nice to have on TV. And if it wasn't for the transsexual terminology issues earlier on, I'd be much more warm to it. But yeah, you're right. It's so minor that in a way the minorness is nice, but it's minor, so it's nothing huge to congratulate. Yeah. Celeste had hair at the end as well.
Yes, she did. What did you think of like the everyone's appearances at the end? So we sort of saw like they all looked a bit. I was amazed that Muriel was still alive. Actually, I totally thought Muriel would be dead by 2034.
Someone did say that Bethany would become Senor, which is so almost accurate that I think it deserves some congratulations.
She looked like Laura Palmer in the Red Room at the end to me when she was in the techno room with Edith. The dress and her manner of speaking and everything.
It was interesting how she's shown to have maybe outgrown her whole sort of transhuman fixation a little bit. Like certainly she doesn't show as much of a desire to become Data now, like Edith was doing. She talks about it in kind of a past tense way. Like, I used to dream of this and stuff, and now she's outgrown it, she's matured it, which maybe has implications for the whole metaphors that r.t.d was setting up in the first episode. But let's not go there.
I thought it was implied that she would do it eventually, but just because Edith was dying, that was the more, salient.
Yeah, maybe.
She said she's going first. I think that's what she said.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I accept that.
Frodo and Bethany's Sam, and the water is the Grey Havens.
Well, I like that it was the realization of the promise that she made in episode 2. That kind of spooky scene when she's like, you can live forever. And now she made, like, that scene, like, it did have kind of like a spooky kind of feel to it. Like, it was very dramatic, and now I kind of know why.
Just one little thing I really loved in this finale was the way Muriel is, like, nostalgic for Senor. So it's like he's evoking nostalgia for a piece of tech, which, I mean, it exists, but, like, it's a fictional future piece of tech. I thought that was kind of charming, almost.
She called him her little friend, didn't she? I thought that was kind of sad and sweet, how just this AI was like a friend to her, just because he actually spoke to her, and like the family who were abandoning her at various points.
It's her friend simulator.
And yet she hates the automated checkouts. So there's that contradiction in Muriel again.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will say one thing about the whole ending thing that I did love, like the big hit, was when we got the fast forward montage and then it stopped and became a rewind. My jaw hit the fucking floor there. I loved that. It was kind of like the payoff of kind of the whole structure of the series. I was like, oh, okay, just getting interesting.
Hold on. Go back a bit.
Irrespective of what came after. You didn't like the rewind?
No, I didn't.
Oh no, why not?
A bit cutesy.
It was trying to like nudge at saying that like, oh, the whole series was framed as Edith's like memories being transferred. Like, I definitely got the sense that that's what that sequence was trying to suggest, not like outright say, but suggest. But you know, the show has had like events past that Edith couldn't possibly have known about. So like the depth of narration is all off there. And what?
Nothing.
I don't know. It's a bit nitpicky, I think. Well, there were scenes that Edith wasn't in. Like, obviously she wasn't remembering those bits, but we still had to see them.
I'm not finished complaining. The bit where
Go on.
the bit where the guy's like, "Oh, we can't have enough Muriel." That was so like, okay, is this meta now? But you have to be meta to serve like some kind of purpose. Like, are you?
It's r.t.d backpatting. What a great character he wrote with Muriel. Oh yeah, we all love her. Yeah, more scenes.
Just completely apropos of nothing. This whole like weird meta angle, which adds nothing to the plot or the themes, or it was just naff. I wasn't into it. What do we think of Leaning Tower of Pisa gag?
Yeah,
it was okay. I thought the Notre Dame coming back was funnier, actually.
Yeah, I kind of liked it because it seemed there was like kind of a theme throughout this episode of like people versus property, and how, you know, property doesn't have inherent value, like Muriel selling the house
Like
and
the
all
house.
that stuff, and like, oh, okay, we can just bring the Notre Dame back, and you know, it's not inherently this like critical thing to like the happiness of the world or whatever. So it seemed like r.t.d did have a little bit of a thread running through the episode, and plus like Bethany, it keeps on being raised that, you know, Bethany is the property of the government, and that like Edith only sees her as like a tool, which I think the show kind of is also guilty of that. But I don't know, it was a nice gag basically, I thought, and it did have context. It had a purpose.
All this property philosophy, did the show radicalize you, Tomtit?
You could say that, yeah. But no, also, I have one other thing, which is that there's been so many discussions throughout these past few episodes about whose fault it was for Daniel's death, and it really bugged me that Ralph's name never came up, even though I know it couldn't have, because no one knows that he is the reason Victor got deported, but it is objectively his fault.
Edith knows. How else would we have seen it?
Exactly. But no, but no, Ralph, fuck Ralph. Just, fuck him.
I think the unfairness of Ralph getting away scot-free with it is kind of that one grain of sort of bitterness that maybe we could have used a bit more of. I don't know, it's like that one just sort of like, nope, the world's unfair. That one element of it. And then otherwise, a weirdly uplifting ending.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I didn't need justice for Ralph, and it's probably a good thing that I feel so passionate about it, because, you know, it means that the show's been effective. But yeah, I thought it's worth mentioning that Ralph got away pretty scot-free.
Deadlocked, any last words?
Yeah,
for the
well...
podcast?
Oh, okay. I was like, it's just a nickname, all right?
We're going to take the locked out of Deadlocked.
Give us your regeneration speech now, please.
All right. Love is a promise. No, hold on. So... I mean, it's basically what I was saying at the beginning. It's like, I liked where the message went. It was where I wanted it to go ever since hearing those speeches about, I don't even know the term I used. I liked it, whatever. But, you know, like thinking that we can't change things because this is the worst it's getting. It's just going to get worse. I liked all that, but it was so fucking messy in the execution. And it was just kind of disappointing. It was disappointing after, you know, how sensational I feel like the series has been. But overall, it's been a fantastic series.
Does anyone else want to phone in with some last words of their own?
I thought the turning point in public opinion might have been that actual British citizens were being kept in the erstwhile camps, but that was completely dropped by the episode, so it was just another video of a refugee camp. I can't imagine that would matter much to his voter base, but I guess that's not any more unrealistic than Trump using Pence as a puppet. Despite all that, I was satisfied by the ending. It was a satisfying conclusion to the series, and I'm happy with it, but part of me still wishes the episode was just Muriel ranting at the audience for an hour.
What gets me about the episode isn't just that it's got a happy ending. Davies does happy endings sometimes, but that I feel that Miracle Day was a lot more on the nose about what would probably really happen if somebody went into a camp and recorded what was going on there. And we're doing it in my country. And people go down there with cameras and they take video of what it's like in the camps, and kids are dying in the camps. I mean, nobody's going down there with a rocket launcher, let's put it that way. I don't know if what he's trying to present us with is mollification or galvanization. Well, what exactly does he think the end game of this is? Or is it just good television? Sometimes I really don't know with Davies.
Guys, I just figure out why it cut out ambiguously at the ending. Right, it's because that very second is when the nuke hits. Do you remember episode 1?
Oh my god.
Oh, the actual same nuke from episode 1.
Like the same.
Holy shit.
Oh my god. That's pretty good.
Years and years and years and years and years and years and years is the actual title. Is the actual title of the show. Wow, that's amazing.
Have you heard of these new slow missiles?
They're more energy efficient.
Yeah, they're made out of fucking compost or onions or something.
Chestnut flavored missile.